Welcome back to Tar Heel Illustrated as we continue to look ahead to the start of football practice. The North Carolina Tar Heels report August 1st. First practice is August 2nd. And we here at TarHeelIllustrated.com will be all over it. Everywhere the Tar Heels go in football and basketball, we go. And that also means every media availability, every practice that's open to the media, we will be there with comprehensive coverage. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones. Joining me is THI staff writer and football analyst Brandon Peay. And we have been looking at each position group, sort of cramming these discussions in as we build up toward the start of fall camp. And before we dive into today's position group, which is the offensive line, very quickly, want to remind you guys that I know many of you are catching us on Facebook. Some of you are catching us on our YouTube channel. Both of those are called Tar Heel Illustrated. Some of you maybe only get our stuff through Twitter at Heel Illustrated, but you got to go over to our website. It's Tar Heel Illustrated. Yes, Brandon's favorite website. He's paid to say that, for full disclosure. If he said it wasn't, I would fire him during the podcast. No, all seriousness, TarHeelIllustrated.com. It gives you access to absolutely everything for just $8.33 a month. That's all of our premium content. Guys, we are highly connected. We have a ton of intel on the boards. We have very well-sourced stuff on the boards that never makes it in these podcasts. You never see it in the free content on the front page. And above all that, and this is something that I've been punching a lot lately because we've had such a great feedback, and the growth on our message boards has been really remarkable. And that's an area that a lot of people get tremendous value out of our site, because you imagine going to work and you have a Carolina friend at work and he wants to talk Carolina football, but he doesn't know half of the starters. He has no idea who Tez Walker is, who transferred in from Kent State, but you do. You know who the starters are. You know that Zach Rice is there. You know Travion Green is there on the offensive line, and you're monitoring their progress. You go into our message boards and you be a part of that community. There are a bunch of people just like you. So you're talking to people who know what they're talking about, as opposed to the casual fan who knows enough. They're satisfied with that, but it's not at your level. So go to our boards, be a member of that community, and you will not regret it. It's a lot of fun. Gets a little chippy every once in a while, but it's respectful for the most part. But sometimes the chippy stuff can be entertaining if you're not the one who is involved in the chipping. That can be kind of fun sometimes. So make sure you go on over there. It's just $8.33 a month, the same price it has been since I took over THI on August 1st. Now, Brandon, the offensive line, we spent time talking about these skill groups on offense, and quarterback, major positive. You might have the Heisman Trophy winner in the first pick in the draft. Running back, there's a lot of depth there, a lot of talent. They got a lot of sorting out to do those still. Wide receiver, really deep with guys that could be big-time producers. Tight end, maybe the best tight end group, certainly in the ACC, perhaps in the country. Offensive line's a different story. The offensive line has been good, but hasn't been great, and it has had issues with pass protection and issues in short yardage situations when you must get that yard, being able to pound ahead and get that yard. From 20 to 20, fantastic, the offensive line has been, and they put some guys in the NFL. But in order for this team to reach its goals, and we're not going to discuss defense here, from an offensive perspective, the offensive line must protect Drake May better. 89 sacks allowed the last 2 years. And when it's third and short or fourth and short, whether it's at midfield or at the 2, they've got to plow ahead and make enough room to get the first down, to move the chains, or even get into the end zone. So what are your thoughts when you look ahead to the offensive line this year about an area or two you think maybe they'll be improved, and an area or two you think is of high concern for Carolina fans?
I think like many offensive lines, I think across the country, I think UNC's offensive line has received some unfair criticism, some fair criticism. I think the criticism you just gave them was very fair. They're very good from 20 to 20, but they kind of struggle once throwing the ball is less of an option because there's less space. They can't run the ball when everybody in the stadium knows a running play is coming, and that's a problem. Because I think if you were to take UNC's offensive line and line them up against every single FBS offensive line in the country, what is that, 330 teams?
Yeah, well, no, 130.
130, yeah.
You're thinking,
about
you're
basketball.
thinking basketball.
Yeah, I'm thinking basketball. 130. They would be in the top probably 30 or 40 of that group. I don't know exactly where they would rank, but they would be in the top third of that group. But I think when you're trying to go from 9 wins to 10 wins, you need the offensive line to be up a little bit higher up on that list. It's kind of like when you're losing weight and when you first start, it's really easy, but then you hit a point where it gets really hard to lose 5 pounds. So you have to adjust, you have to change things, you kind of have to hone in to get that extra 5 pounds off. And I think that's where UNC's offensive line is. Like, they're not bad, but there's one more step they need to take to be with the upper echelon of college football, and they have to get better in the red zone, running the ball between the tackles when everybody knows what's coming. And I think a couple of years ago they could do that well when they had Javonte Williams and Michael Carter, but I think the running backs had a lot to do with that. They have to be able to create momentum for the running backs. I feel like, because this is an older group now. They're no longer young. These guys have kind of been around for a while now.
They've been an older group for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
You went weight loss, which was a fantastic analogy. I'm going to go a little bit different with pitching in baseball. If you have a good starting pitcher who 12 pitches, 10 pitch innings, he's out 1, 2, 3, gets a guy on out 1, 2, 3, and he goes through 4 or 5 innings and there's goose eggs on the board. All of a sudden he runs into that one inning where he gives up 3 or 4 runs. And it happens every game, and it's head scratching. And then if he makes it through the next inning, he throws up another goose egg. What I'm getting at is there are a lot of things this line does well. There are a lot of stretches where they look fantastic, but then they hit certain spots where they don't. Whether it's a scheme, whether it's a certain level of athleticism off the edge when it comes to the sacks, I think sometimes they don't. I think the second layer of protection and pass protection has not been very good. I thought that was an issue at times last year, and it was the year before as well. And then when they get into those tight situations, like you get a couple of guys on base and a pitcher changes. Sometimes there's not as much bite on the fastball. Maybe the breaking ball doesn't break as much because he's gone from the stretch instead of the windup. I think this offensive line has some of those issues. So the key is to limit that 4-run inning to 2. That means if they can increase the percentage of times that they are successful in short yard situations by, let's say, 20, 25%, and they decrease the number of sacks allowed and the pickup, when the tight end helps out in pass protection before releasing, make sure the block is made, make sure the protection is there before releasing, or just don't release sometimes. Those kinds of things will show measured progress for this group, and I think make an enormous difference for this offense, because if they're not stymied and everything is equal and it's sort of like a video game, Drake's going to get him in the end zone most of the time, as long as they don't turn the ball over. So that to me is the key. They have to make 20, 25% progress minimum in those 2 areas. And I think when you talk about Randy Clements, they brought him in because his offensive lines, if you go back to Baylor for 10 years, they didn't give up a great deal of sacks. I went and looked at the numbers. There were only a couple of years where there were big sack numbers. And part of that was a youthful offensive line and poor quarterback play. Poor quarterback play can lead to a lot of sacks. That was an area Sam Howell struggled with, and it's one of the reasons he dropped in the draft. And it's an area that Drake says his footwork can improve on, can help. And he said that he has improved his footwork. So, and then, of course, the short yardage stuff. Randy Clements is known for glass-eating offensive linemen. They chew up glass and they swallow it with glee. That's what this group needs to do in order to make these take these steps forward.
No, I completely agree, and I think when you look across their line, I think the starting 5. When you look at the starting 5, I think there is that potential to have that glass eating mentality, like you just said. I think a third issue that you didn't mention is the depth behind the starting 5. I think the starting 5, they can pretty much hang. They can hang with a lot of different defensive lines, but once you get to number 6, 7, 8, it kind of, the drop off is kind of steep. And I think, and a lot of those guys that are in those positions, they've also been around Carolina they're not young guys anymore. They've been there 2-3 years now. And Mac Brown mentioned this earlier in the spring that, it's time for some of those guys to step up and take on a bigger role within the offensive line room.
Yeah, let's look at some of these guys. I think it's 6 that they're really, really comfortable with. And quite frankly, you could throw a seventh in there with Jonathan Adorno. I don't think Adorno has yet reached a level of confidence from the staff that maybe Ed Montilus has or Corey Gaynor, but I think he's closing that gap. The six would be William Barnes, who's your starting left tackle. All right. Corey Gaynor, the starting center. And you got Spencer Rowland starting right tackle. In between those guard spots, you're looking at Ed Montilus, who decided not to come back for his last year and then decided he missed it so much a couple weeks later, did come back for his last year, and they had a place open for him. You're talking about Adorno, who's gotten some experience. The game that you shot on the field last year down at Georgia State, Adorno started that game and graded out pretty well. And then you're talking about Willie Lampkin. Now, if you want to look up in a dictionary the personification of glass chewing offensive lineman, I think Willie Lampkin's that guy. He's way undersized. There's a reason he wasn't recruited to the Power 5 schools, because he's the easy guy to spot when you look at the offensive line, because there's a little drop, because he's 5'10", 5'11". And he looks me in the eye. And there's a roly-poly element to him that some people say, but he is ferocious. He was 47-0 as a wrestler in high school. He was the Sun Belt Conference Offensive Lineman of the Year last year, and he moved to guard. That was the first year he played guard extensively. He was a center beforehand. So what Carolina has in him is a guy that can play left guard, right guard, and center. I can see him being the backup in all three spots, or I can see him starting, say, at right guard with Montilus at left guard, and he could back up Gaynor at center, and he could back up Montilus at left guard, which will allow Adorno to get some reps as well. And I do think Adorno can play both guard spots as well. They want to play more depth. One of the issues last year was Jack Bicknell just refused to play the bench. And that was a tremendous mistake, and that hurt the development of guys like Pounds and McGowan and Eli Sutton and those guys. They just didn't get on the field when they should have gotten some reps. They're going to play the bench more this year, and I was told by somebody in the program, to paraphrase, we got to get them ready for 24.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of experience there, but we got to get these guys ready for 24. So we've got to get them on the field. They have to bang hats against Power 5 guys, and they have to get stuff on film so they can learn. So you're going to see more guys play on the offensive line. And I think there are a couple of dudes that could take significant steps forward when fall camp starts right on through the season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't think about that, but I agree with that. They have to get these guys on the field because they have to get them ready for 24. Because offensive line is different than any other position, because you can't – there are offensive linemen in the transfer portal, but usually they're there for a reason. That you don't want them. You want, like, it's hard to find offensive linemen. They're not a dime a dozen. They're really hard to find. So the ones that you scouted while they were in high school and you brought into your program and you think you feel comfortable with, you have to develop those guys, because like, I think other positions you could depend on the transfer portal, but I just think with the offensive line, you need time to gel, to build continuity. I don't know. I don't think you can just obviously you can bring in some guys. They brought in Corey Gaynor, but I don't think you can just depend on that as a sole source of recruiting for your offensive line. I think you have to develop from within. It's the most developmental position there is in football.
It is. They brought in Spencer Rowland, but he's going to be a different player than he was before, because Harvard did not have an organized offseason program for football. So this past year is the first time he's been in an organized, almost everyday offseason program for football. And I've been told by some people in the program, they think that there's potential he could be an NFL guy. So it'll be interesting to see if he's someone who really breaks out and has a big year. Now, as far as the portal goes, that's part of the reason why they got to play those guys too. You're right. It's hard to find good offensive linemen in the portal, but the ones that are out there cost a ton of money.
Yeah.
They cost there was a backup center from App State that went to Oklahoma and got $150,000. Right?
Wow. I wouldn't even think about
that. From a Sun Belt school, excuse me. So that stuff's out there. These guys the offensive linemen are commanding a huge price tag. So when you look at Carolina's reserve offensive linemen, you got to get Diego Pounds on the field some. You got to get McGowan out there. You got to get Zach Rice out there at some point, although Zach still has some work to do. You got to get Eli Sutton and Trevion Green out there. And I'll tell you what, one of the positives of spring practice that we wrote about some as well. And I put a note on the board in our couple of notes thread, which is Inside Intel. And I'll go ahead and reveal it here because I put that up there a few months ago. They love what RJ Grigsby and DJ Geth did in spring practice.
Yeah.
Like they went from two guys that they didn't think would get on the field at all to two guys who have a chance to push their way up. So when they play Campbell, maybe they're ready to get some significant snaps in a game like that. So I think that they like where the group is, but at this position group, there's a lot of schools that would take some of these guys. And they would do pretty well in the portal. So Carolina's going to have to play these guys. And they got to keep the O-line fresh. You've got to be able to punch it in the fourth quarter at Wake Forest instead of kicking field goals, at versus NC State instead of kicking field goals, against Oregon in the bowl game instead of trying to kick a field goal, that kind of stuff. You've got to get touchdowns there instead of field goals. You don't want to have a game to be determined by the foot of a kicker because it cost them a couple of times last year. You get in the end zone, you don't have to worry about that stuff. That's why they need to be fresher late. That's why they need to be stronger. And, of course, that 20 to 25% improvement rate that we were talking about must be a part of this group in order for the offense to be outstanding or possibly even phenomenal, which the potential is there for it to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And you can't forget about Willie Lampkin. We talked about Willie Lampkin earlier. You talked about how the size. I think he's a guy that's really going to add to the group. I think he's going to be a really big positive for the group because I think when you're undersized, this is just a theory I came up with today, actually. But I think when you're undersized and you are able to work
a tried and true theory, huh?
Yeah. I think when you're undersized and you're able to work your way to a starting position on a good team, there's something special about you because obviously, like when you're going through the recruiting process, so many coaches are going to eliminate you off the gate just based on your size alone. But for him to be able to overcome that, still make it to a Division I school, win Offensive Lineman of the Year, in a good
league. In a
good league, and play as a true freshman. I just think all those things combined they're just like it's evidence that he could possibly be, a special player. Like you think about Josh Downs, undersized, special player. That's only a really example I can think of right now off the top of my head. But I just think when you're able to get through the gauntlet of a college football depth chart, you're undersized and you're able to overcome that, I think that's just signs of intangibles that you really can't be taught.
My favorite scene in the movie Rudy, and if you haven't watched Rudy, shame on you, go watch it tonight. My favorite scene in the movie Rudy was during spring practice when he's just going balls out. And at some point, one of the starters goes over to him and says, why don't you chill out? You're making us look bad.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a Rudy. You need that guy that is squeezing every drop of everything he has, and he's making people look bad. He's making more talented guys look bad. I'm not saying that Willie Lampkin doesn't have talent, but there are some limitations that he is very open speaking about. Mm-hmm. But he also says, well, I think they're also, but I've made them positives because I go all out. An example of that was when he broke his hand or something in spring practice, and which is why he ended up not snapping the ball for most of the spring. Chance Carroll was the backup in the spring game and throughout most of spring. But instead of getting tended to with a trainer, he insisted on staying on the field and finishing his drills. He's going to stay out there. And that's one of those things that it's a moment in time, if you can isolate. A group may head in a certain direction, and there are specific little landmark moments that get them there. That's a moment in time, I think, that can be something we look back on in this offensive line where that next layer of edge that they need to become that 20 to 25% we were talking about, that's there. Because if this dude, who doesn't look like he belongs here, gets injured but stays in there, and he's going to keep going back at it, just like when Rudy was getting blocked into the next county but kept going back at it, blood coming out of his mouth. Those guys have a positive effect on the people around them. And I think that he has it. I'm not trying to overblow what Willie Lampkin is or anything like that, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that the staff loves him for that, and they see that. And when you get that into the room and that air starts to circulate and filter through, that can change a group. And it'll be very interesting to see if that has a lasting effect on these guys. Because I know it did. It helped them in the spring for sure. I've been told that.
Yeah, for sure. Kamen Rucker is another example of an undersized guy, special guy, working his way into the lineup. I knew I could think of another one. Yeah. I'm gonna think of that theory. I'm gonna think
a guy that'll be in the NFL too. By the way, that they should just put his position should just be football player.
Yeah, football player. Yeah, football player. They have him listed as Jack on the roster, but football player because he can play a lot of places. But this isn't a defensive line or.
No. Real quickly, one guy to keep an eye on, and he didn't do. He was limited, obviously, in the spring. Is Trevion Green. He came in with Rice, and Rice was ballyhooed, and Rice made some progress in the spring. And he's actually, my understanding, he's had a pretty good offseason. But he still has a ways to go. People expected him to get on the field and play right away. We thought at first maybe he could. And I think I personally misread that situation a little bit. But Trevion Green, wasn't that hyped. He's a guy that's come a long way from where his body used to be at one point in high school to where he is now. The staff loves him. Like they think he could be a big time player at some point. And it will be interesting to monitor his progress during fall camp. And we do a lot of offensive line coverage during fall camp, and where he is when they get to say the open date after 4 games, after they go to Pittsburgh. What does that rotation up front look like? How deep do they go? And how much does Trevion Green factor into that rotation? I think he's the one guy on the outside looking in that has a chance to break the rotation, maybe more than anybody else.
Yeah, for sure. And then he has a side. He came into Chapel Hill with the physicals already ready to go, which a lot of offensive linemen don't do. So if he's spent the offseason, getting better with the mental stuff, there's no reason he can't break. Because I remember you telling me about him. I think you saw him at the Showtime camp, and you were like, "There's this guy. He's huge, but he shouldn't be able to move the way he moves." And I remember at the time. He wasn't offered by Carolina. They were saying he needed to lose weight or something.
Yeah, there was a lot of schools that just didn't. He had to show what he could do.
Yeah,
for a lot of schools, like show us the accountability, show us the discipline, show us it matters to you.
Yeah,
and he did, and he is. When you talk to anybody around the staff, they just gush about him, about his potential and what he could be, and they have tremendous respect for what he's done to his body. Any last thoughts about the O-line? And do you think that 20 to 25% is realistic?
Yeah, I do think I think anytime you change coach, I think there is going to be a natural, like a little bit of a boost just from the newness of I think the new coaching staff, offensive line, I think the play calling will help the offensive line a lot. And I think just a natural progression as players get older, I think they get stronger, they get better. So I do think the 20-25% improvement is a legitimate, realistic thing that could happen. Will it happen?
Jack Bicknell was only around for 8 months.
Yeah.
And he was a Longo guy. And when Longo left, you knew that Bicknell was going to go. And so he never really got a chance to sink his teeth in. And perhaps he had his eye. Maybe he only had 1 foot in Chapel Hill. I don't know. But I've been told things that would lead one to believe that. Randy Clements has both feet in Chapel Hill, and he's a glass chewer. Stacey Searle's pretty good offensive line coach. He got dumped on when he was at Carolina by the fans. But by the way, he got a ring this past year, Georgia. Their offensive line's pretty damn good. Randy Clements is a glass chewer. They needed a glass chewer up front. I've talked about the additions that Mac made to the staff. Over at quarterback on defense, bringing in the analysts, bringing in Randy Clements, Chip Lindsey, Freddie Kitchens with the tight ends. This is a much better staff than it was even a year ago. And I think up front, this is the best offensive line coach they've had in a while. And I think we're going to see the evidence of that at some point during the season. Is it early? I don't know. Should be, because you got an older group. It shouldn't be a massive adjustment for those guys, especially since a lot of them, this is their last shot. If they want to play at the next level, they got a lot riding on that game in this season. So I do think 20 to 25% is possible. I think if they go 12 to 15%, that might be enough, especially if the defense makes progress. But I do think more than anything, even more than the sack numbers, they've got to be better on the short yard situations. If they show us that they're glass chewers up front early, that's a very positive sign for the offense and for this team.
I agree. I agree with that. That's a good way to end it.
That is a good way to end it. He's Brandon Peay. I'm AJ. Thanks for stopping by.